Curiosity about afterlife and paranormal is universal throughout the history and across cultures. While the progress of science drove such interest more to sub- and underground culture today, in a sense it became even more widespread via the internet. Indeed, we now have access to all sorts of paranormal stories, theories, and rituals just few clicks away, and one of the most popular subjects among them should be necromancy. Beyond the classics like Ouija board or Bloody Mary game, there are numerous necromantic rituals of all sorts shared on the internet, many of which are pretty sketchy and lack of details. But for many, often bored teenagers and young adults who just want to have a bit of a fun, it doesn't seem to matter much. After all, it's just a silly game, isn't it? Korea is not an exception there either. I have already touched about 분신사바, a Korean take on Ouija board, in one of my past episodes. Links in the description and at the corner if you missed it. But of course there are many more rituals that are supposed to summon ghosts and spirits floating around the internet. And among them are also a few cautionary tales of when these light-hearted games go wrong. After all, these types of games are better not working because they rarely come with the instructions and solutions of what to do in case they really manage to summon a ghost. Today I'm reading you 3 allegedly true stories from Korea about necromantic games gone wrong, even terribly wrong in some cases. As always, handpicked, translated and narrated by your host, Anthony. "12 years ago, I entered the university in Jeju Island. It was far from home, and I got a place in the university dormitory. The dorm room was to be shared by 3. One of my roommates was a freshman like myself, and the other was an older student just back from his military service. They were all easygoing, so we 3 soon got along pretty well. We would sneak in drinks in the room, which was forbidden, for an evening get-together, and sometimes we spent weekends together too. One evening we were having beer and fried chicken night as usual. The topic somehow moved to horror stories, and the older roommate talked about the method of summoning a ghost. Turn all the lights in the room off, find a particularly bleak or chilling corner, and greet towards it every day. Simple. By then we were all nicely tipsy, and our room, which was always drafty, seemed a perfect place to try it out to our minds, whose usual rationality loose with alcohol. So we turned the lights off and greeted to the corner where the door situated. "Hi, how are you?" Nothing. Well, what were we expecting? We just laughed, turned lights back, and resumed our drinks. Nothing more than a stupid superstition anyway. But the older mate seemed to be taking it a bit more seriously than the rest of us. He insisted the instructions said to carry it on daily, and said he'd like to give it a try. So every night before bed, he greeted to the dark void. "Hi, how are you?" Or some days, "Hi, why not give us a visit?" Or some other times, "Welcome back, had a good day?" And so on and so forth over a week. Then one day, he reported us back with excitement. "It works! I saw a ghost!" He said the ghost greeted him back from the corner in front of the door. We thought he must be joking, as he usually liked to pull pranks and silly jokes, but this time he suddenly snapped and accused us of disrespecting him. From that day on, he started having a little chit-chat to the void in the early hours of the morning. He didn't seem minding our presence in the room at all. I began to feel concerned about him, and one morning I eavesdropped what he was saying from my bed. "What? "He's not sleeping," he was saying. My heart dropped at that, and foolishly I couldn't hold back my curiosity and looked up from bed, and met his eyes staring right back at me. He glared at me as if I were his archenemy, and then stomped out of the room. During the day, I tried to discuss the incident with the other roommate, but he just dumbed it down as if being under lots of stress towards the graduation, and that I should just ignore it. But I couldn't take it so lightly. That night, I again stayed up to listen to what the older roommate should be saying. He had a lively chit-chat towards the door as usual, then suddenly stood up and said, "I agree. I've had it enough here. Let's leave now." And then he walked out of the room. I waited a while, but he didn't come back over an hour, nor did he answer my calls. I started feeling anxious and looked around the communal areas in the dormitory. In vain. I talked to the security too, but he didn't seem to take it seriously. He didn't come back. A couple of days later, his mobile stopped getting the call signals, meaning it was left to run out of battery, and we finally reported to the police. A few days later, he was found on the rooftop of the dormitory building. He had slashed his wrist. Nobody could explain how he could get there when the door to the rooftop was chained and locked. I explained to the police what had been happening to him, but of course, police didn't seem to take it seriously. Actually, I wasn't sure if I was believing in my own story either. There was no evidence of the foul play, and the incident was concluded as a suicide. Soon I moved out of the dormitory. I could not bear looking at the dorm room door anymore. I still cannot shake off the sense of guilt for failing to stop him in time. I cannot tell if it was really a ghost that had lured him, yet I'd strongly advise against trying out these paranormal games for fun. It's been 3 days, but I still have hard time to sleep soundly. I'm a uni student and live by myself. 3 days ago, I felt so bored, and out of impulse, looked up ways to conjure spirits. On hindsight, it's incredibly silly, but I thought I might gain some sort of superpower like precognition should I really manage to contact a spirit. My casual research came up with a ritual involving a mirror, staring at the edge of a mirror for 3 minutes, then turn off the light and say, "I want to see you," or something like that, into the mirror. It also involved writing some Chinese letters on a piece of paper, perhaps a spell or talisman, I have no idea. As you can imagine, I didn't pay much attention to details, but the instruction was simple enough and I just went for it spontaneously. And oh my goosebumps! I saw on the edge of the mirror faintly fogging up as if somebody was breathing on it. It wasn't even a cold day, and it couldn't have been natural condensation. I freaked a bit, but was curious and watched on. A while later, the fog disappeared. I thought maybe that was it, and just went back playing a game before going to bed. And in the dream, I saw a little girl, wearing a yellow shirt and green shorts, and a big bloody slash on her belly. She called me with an expressionless face, and at first I unwittingly approached her. Then I saw a red thread tied to her wrist and stopped myself. The girl then ran towards me. I panicked and screamed, "Don't come, go away!" As she got closer, I could see she had cuts and slashes all over, on her chest, neck, and legs. While I struggled to pushed the girl away, I was woken up by the loud banging on my door. It was my next-door neighbor. He said he heard me screaming through the thin wall and asked me if I was all right. I wouldn't have done it in usual situations, but I was still freaking out, and I told him what happened that evening, the ritual and dreams and all. Fortunately, my neighbor listened to me quietly, and I did feel a bit better for having confided to somebody. Before he went back to his room, he said, "I think you'd better find a way to close the situation before going back to bed." That prompted me to go back to the internet site where I found the ritual, and found a word of warning at the end of the article that I had skipped earlier, that one should burn the talisman, the piece of paper I wrote the Chinese letter on, to close the ritual. Where did I put that paper? I could not find it, and I frantically searched through every corner like a person who lost his mobile. In the end, I found it under the duvet. I have no idea however it got in there, but I burned it in the toilet. Later I learned the necromantic ritual, improperly finished, could result to conjure the spirit following the performer around or even possessing the person. Thank God for my neighbor waking me up and hinting me what I forgot to do. I still don't sleep well, but at least the girl didn't return in my dreams so far. Six years ago, I lived at the dormitory of my university. One chilly evening of early winter, I got a call from a friend, fellow dorm resident. "Hey, come over. You can't miss this." "What do you mean?" "My roommate brought in his friend and he is something." "What about him?" "Just come over. It's creepy here." As we'd been fans of horror stories and had already spent many boring evenings chatting over the subject, I came to his room hoping for something meaty. In the room were 4 or 5 people gathered around drinks and fried chicken. His roommate's friend, let's call him Che, indeed gave off an unusual vibe. He was wearing modified traditional outfit with elaborately decorated beads around his neck and wrist. Only later I got to learn, but Che belonged to a sort of Taoism sect that practiced Zen and Qi training. Anyway, their present topic was necromancy. "Is it really possible to call in a ghost?" "It is, but not anybody can do that," said Che tentatively. "Shamans do, though. They contact spirits, don't they? They were born with certain gift to start with." With that, Che tried to call it a day, saying he needed to catch his bus, but with others' uproaring protest, he was persuaded to stay overnight. Apparently his sect did deal with the idea and practice of necromancy, but Che was clearly reluctant to indulge with a particular topic. But after 3-hour-long drinks and nagging from us, he finally imparted the art of necromancy. Apparently, Che explained, it called for the perfect match of the right weather, place, ingredients, and earnestness of the performer. He himself had never tried it and only briefly researched out of curiosity. So the first element was weather. It has to be the day full of yin energy, namely a night with bright moonlight about 2-3 in the morning. Second was the location. It has to face the north and called for a white screen or wall. And then ingredients. It calls for blood. Human blood is the best way to prove the performer is earnest, but chicken blood would do too as a substitute. You also need certain type of incense made with a particular species of wood ideally, and then a talisman purpose created for necromancy. And a bowl of clean water too. When everything was ready, choose a night of the full moon, put the talisman on the north-facing white screen or wall, and sprinkle a mixture of blood and water. It would take about a week of nightly ritual, and then you'd feel a spirit reaching out to you. Maybe. My friend and his roommate were seriously up to trying it out. As interested as I was, I honestly couldn't be bothered that much, and thought those two wouldn't either eventually. I mean, where do you get hold of blood, screen, talisman, etc. on the university campus? But about 5 days later, the friend pulled me to the side and said they were going to try it out that night. He and the roommate had poked, nagged, and bribed the chair all the while till he gave in and drew them the necessary talisman. They also got hold of a cup of chicken blood from the local butcher. And the north-facing wall on the rooftop of the dormitory building would provide the ideal spot, he said. For the first 2 nights, I was dragged out in the chilly night air to witness their half-baked ritual.
Nothing's happening. Do you feel anything?
Patience, buddy. We are not ghostbusters.
God, my balls are frozen stiff. Let's get down.
Nevertheless, they were still up to carry on for the next 5 days. I just laughed at them and thought it should all come to nothing in the end. About 10 days later, I noticed a friend skipping his lectures. I came around to his room to check on him. The room was dark even in the day, and my friend was still on bed, blank-eyed. He didn't even seem to notice me. "Hey, what's up? You're looking like dead." "Yeah, maybe a cold." But it seemed much more than a cold. "So why all the fuss in the cold of the night for days?" I teased, but he didn't react. After a silence, he finally opened his mouth. "Something's not right, you know. The ritual was half-minded play. I was ready to quit after a few days." But into the 5th day, they couldn't be bothered going down to the butcher for the fresh batch of blood, and just used their own blood from the pricked fingers. Nothing was amiss during the day, but from the night on, he started to get a dream. From the window of his dorm room, one could see the abandoned project of the new dormitory building on the hillside. Since they began the ritual, he started to see in his dream a shadow of something behind the window of that half-finished empty building. As days passed, it seemed coming closer bit by bit, and since the day they used their own blood, the approach speeded up significantly. And finally, 2 days ago, it came close enough for them to see it was a guy. And previous night, when he woke up startled from the guy's face ever coming closer and becoming distinctive, he found his roommate sitting on his bed, his head in hands and breathing hard.
"Shit, who's that guy? Why won't he leave me alone?"
"Do you have the same dreams too?"
"Let's quit it now. It's getting scary."
But that didn't help. And just earlier, my friend woke up from seeing the guy now faintly smiling at him. God, it was frightening. That smile seemed like saying he was going to play with me before he kills me, like a cat with a captured mouse. I don't think I can ever sleep again. I tracked down Chair right away. Upon hearing what was going on, his face changed color. He came to my friend and his roomie. I'm sorry. I didn't think you'd actually go for it.
It's nothing. It's just a dream.
The roomie was still in denial. What kind of dream continues for 2 weeks? My friend bursted. Whatever difference in their reaction, both looked to death after days of restless nights. Che picked up. I didn't think it'd work at all. I even instructed you for the safety to use chicken blood, which actually deters spirits.
Actually, we also used our own blood.
What? Che seemed baffled, but he quickly gathered himself and wrote them a talisman to put on their window. He also instructed to get some branches of peach tree from the campus park to put in the room. With that, the ghost might give up in a few days, Che consoled them. A couple of days later, I got a call from my friend, confirming that it seemed to be working. The man in the dream would still come up to the window, but he would be just fidgeting without actually looking into the room. But the next day, I found my friend and his roomie smoking in front of the dorm. They looked nervous and the roomie was limping. I asked them what was up. They both seemed out of mind. The roomie was reluctant, but in the end explained what had happened the night before. In the dream, the ghost was again just wandering up and down outside their window. But suddenly he screamed something unintelligible, then glaring his eyes looking straight at the roomie, he lunged reaching over the window. His hands grabbed on the roomie's leg and he shouted, Come with me now! The roomie held onto the bed frame and resisted, kicking and crying, but Ghost was so powerful and half of his body was dragging out of the window. Fortunately, my friend woke him up then, as he heard the roomie shaking and growling in his sleep. But roomie found his leg that was grabbed by the ghost so painful that he could not walk without limping. They now seemed mortally worried about their life should it continue on this pace. I called the chair right away again.
They shouldn't have used their blood,
said Che. He told me that he'd visit his sect to ask for a solution, and the troubled two should just stay put calmly in their room till he was back. And he did come back at 9 that night. He speculated the ghost seemed to have lots of grudge and must have something to do with a half-built building. Later I found out a night watch was murdered on the site. But Che didn't come back empty-handed and took out a talisman. Apparently the strongest of all, nothing like the amateur one he wrote before. Wrote on yellow paper made with kotso tree, letters written with the red ink made from a cinnabar and chicken blood and so on and so forth. My friend and the roomie didn't react to Che's excitement as if having given up already. Che put that all-powerful talisman on the window and tried to perk them up. Stay put and just endure a few more days. You two have to fight for yourselves for it to work, said Che. Next morning I came to see them. My friend seemed still exhausted and his roomie was asleep, but the new talisman seemed to have worked. The ghost screamed and threw a temper tantrum. The talisman should have an impact. He lunged at me too, crying, Come with me, but was kept pushed back, said my friend. I too shouted him back to piss off. Go back where he's from. The dead can't hurt the living. He smiled faintly and lied back down to sleep more. A week later, the ghost seemed to have lost all the edge and now just cried and wrung his hands pathetically, before finally fading away. But the unforgettable memory of the nightmare lingered. My friend opted for the military service before the next semester, and his roomie sadly was killed in a car accident. He seemed to have never quite shaken off the trauma up to the day of his death. Their story has turned to a cautionary tale floating around the dormitory. My last word is, curiosity can kill the cat. Really. Hi, it's Anthony here, and thank you very much for your listening. Hope you enjoyed today's stories. I spent pretty boring and bored teenage years, but it was yet at the dawn of widespread internet communities and never got to learn or try out such games as described in today's stories. I wonder if any of you tried such yourselves? How did it go? Do let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed my work, please don't forget to click the like button, leave me a comment, and activate the notification bell for the future uploads. Or why not subscribe to become a part of this little community? I'll come back for more next week. Stay safe and take care.